Hey Kevin, well, I guess we'll keep it Rodman here. You heard what we were talking about before, and I'm wondering, is it possible for a very low usage guy who doesn't contribute at all, like Rodman did, to not hurt an offense because so few people need to be doing the actual dirty work to make an offense run?
All right, well, what I'm going to introduce to you is a theory that I have stolen from a blog that I read many years ago and do not remember what it was and have been unable to locate it on the internet ever since. So I guess I'm passing it off as my own unless someone comes to me and tells me it was yours. It's the gravity theory of offense. So every offensive player in the basketball carries a certain gravity toward the defense because of the fact that it draws defensive attention to you. So the ball has a certain gravity because you have to pay attention to where it is at all times. The hoop also has gravity because you have to guard it. A player like Dennis Rodman, a low usage player in general, has very little gravity because defenses are able to double off of them. They're not able to, they're not needing to pay as much attention to them as they are to someone who's a good shooter or someone who has a high usage rate. In Rodman's case, because of his offensive rebounding, I do think he had a lot of gravity when he was around the basket. You had to pay attention to him. You had to keep him boxed out, or else he was just going to kill you on the offensive glass. As soon as he stepped away from the basket, that's when he didn't have very much gravity because of the fact that he couldn't shoot the ball from the outside, and he still did a fair amount, which is why his shooting percentages in Chicago were as dismal as they were, despite his low usage rate. So that's where I think he was hurting in offense is anytime he was away from the basket. I do think there is to some extent, I think Beckley made a good point that always played with superstars. We never saw Dennis Rodman with just an average offensive team to see kind of what that would necessarily look like. I think in some ways on offense, he was a luxury that a team like Chicago and even San Antonio could afford to take advantage of everything else that he was doing. But I do still think he wasn't helping them as much as even an average offensive player would have.
That's very interesting. I'm wondering, as we were talking about before, or as I mentioned before, I think that the illegal defense rule change perhaps significantly altered how offenses function and how defenses function. Do you think that such a change might impact the gravity theory in any way?
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. I will note that the best defenses, like my own beloved and Beckley's beloved Sonics, were playing zone defense even when it wasn't legal to do so. But yeah, there was a certain there was a certain gravity that was required there because you couldn't double away from the ball. You couldn't do certain things that has changed now.
I knew I couldn't stop this from somehow turning into a little bit of a Seattle love fest between you and Beckley. I'm just surprised that it took so long for it to actually happen. I read your Rodman piece arguing that he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. I thought it was a very well written, very interesting piece, but it surprised me that you said that basically we should count as a factor that Rodman didn't make. I think you believe he made one All-Star team, and he didn't have many individual honors to his name. I was surprised by that. I was surprised by that opinion since you tend to work with the objective, and what I want to know is, do you think that what fans thought at the time should factor in general to who we named to the Hall of Fame?
Well, if it was strictly a matter of fan voting, I mean, I wouldn't use All Stars necessarily as to make a case for someone. Like, if we felt like Yao Ming was on the borderline for the Hall of Fame based on strictly on his NBA performance, which, is not the entirety of his case. I don't think the fact that he got voted an All Star starter every year adds to his case. But when you talk about someone who was eligible for the coaches' vote, year after year and wasn't getting picked by them. Then also the media's votes in terms of all NBA team and things like that. I think that it's a piece of evidence. It's a data point. It's not sufficient on itself, but I think it suggests to me that the statistics that we have for Rodman aren't necessarily tremendously undervaluing him. He wasn't secretly, a superstar player. It's possible for him to have been a Hall of Famer and only made the All-Star team 2 times, but I think it raises the bar of that in that discussion that you have to provide a lot more evidence that he was a great player.
Hmm. I think that's a good way to put it. And this is a non-Robin related question, but one about my local Golden State Warriors. I feel like advanced stats and the projections in Basketball Prospectus often say that they'll do a lot better than they end up doing. Do you think that's a failure on the part of the projections and the numbers, or reflective of bad management that is undermining the talent on that team year after year?
I think probably a little of both. I think that it probably does speak to the injuries in many years at the Warriors, and the coaching, and the inexplicable coaching decisions that were being made there at one point with Don Nelson. But I mean, they also kind of are in the sweet spot for what metrics don't get in terms of, Shaney in particular doesn't make any adjustment for passing ability at this point. Haven't figured out how to quantify that. And the Warriors, historically, not a very good passing team, a team that tends to play a lot of one-on-one. It's easier to quantify offense than it is defense. The Warriors have been a much better offensive team than they have on defense. So I think that those factors definitely are reasons why the Warriors would come out better than they really should, in those projections.